Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet Nevada retiree crosses paths with a power-hungry HOA president, his peaceful suburban life turns into a battlefield. Secret patrols, fake enforcers, and midnight raids push him and his MMA-trained son into a fight for freedom, one house, one lawsuit at a time. I've lived in this house for 12 years. Quiet corner of Nevada. Modest one-story home with a covered porch, a reliable internet connection, and a backyard big enough to remind you what space really feels like. Nothing fancy. Just clean air, distant mountains, and no one banging on my door at odd hours. Or so I thought. My name's Dan Harding. I'm 55, widowed, semi-retired IT consultant, and allergic to drama. I moved here to be left alone, and until recently, that's exactly how it was. The neighborhood's governed by a homeowners association, but they've always kept to themselves. Annual newsletters, occasional notices about trash pickup delays, and once a strongly worded email about someone using colored mulch. That was about as exciting as it got, until the election. A few months back, the HOA voted in a new president, Karen Douglas. Blonde bob, yoga pants, eyes like twin laser pointers. She came in like a political candidate on a holy mission talking about order, enforcement, and community integrity. Day one, she replaced the welcome sign at the neighborhood entrance with a massive banner that read, Pride, Security, Standards. I knew we were in for something. It didn't take long before I got my first notice. Found it taped to my front door like a bad Yelp review. A typed letter, no signature, stating that my front floodlight was overly luminous and disturbing the harmony of nighttime aesthetics. I didn't even know that was a thing. A few days later, I got another. Vehicle not aligned properly in driveway. Front bumper 2 degrees off HOA recommended axis. I read it 3 times, thought it was satire, then went outside and stood next to my car trying to see the imaginary line I'd apparently crossed. At first, I just ignored them. Paper goes in recycling, and I go back to my coffee. But then came a third one. This time, it accused me of suspicious nocturnal activity, referencing frequent late-night entries by unidentified male. That unidentified male was my son Nick, who had recently moved back in with me while recovering from an injury. He's 28. A professional MMA fighter and built like a linebacker who moonlights as a bouncer. He's harmless unless you come at him swinging. Unfortunately, Karen's goons didn't ask for context. Now, I'm no fan of confrontation, but I'm also not a pushover. I dug up the HOA charter and bylaws from my filing cabinet. Yes, I'm that guy, and went through them line by line. Nowhere did it authorize fines or property inspections without a full board vote and due process. I drafted a formal letter citing specific clauses and sent it by certified mail to the HOA office. I even included a copy of the HOA's own rulebook with the relevant sections highlighted in yellow, polite, firm, and legally airtight. A week later, I found another piece of paper, not mailed, not even folded, just slipped under my door in the dead of night. It read, Next violation will result in internal inspection. That was it. No letterhead, no name. Just those words in bold 12-point font. That's when I realized something was off. This wasn't bureaucracy anymore. It was a warning. Nick didn't take it lightly. He's got good instincts, and the whole thing smelled like prelude to something worse. That night, we walked the perimeter and installed motion lights. The next morning, he ordered a full home security system. Cameras, sensors, live alerts, the whole 9 yards. If they're planning to pull anything, he said, they're not going to like what they find. And just like that, my peaceful little patch of desert suburbia started to feel less like home and more like a sandbox someone else wanted to play king in. 2 nights after that anonymous note was slid under my door, I noticed the black SUV. It rolled past my house slow enough to make you feel watched. Tinted windows, matte finish, with HOA Enforcement Division stenciled on the side in silver block letters. It looked official, too official, the kind of branding meant to intimidate, not inform. For a moment, I thought it might be a city vehicle. But no. The county doesn't do midnight laps through suburban neighborhoods in SUVs that look like off-brand SWAT vans. The next day, I caught them again. Mid-morning. Parked across the street, engine idling. A guy sitting behind the wheel wearing a dark uniform, sunglasses, and an earpiece. Not a cop. Not private security either. Something in between. or at least pretending to be. By the time I walked down my driveway to confront him, he drove off. That afternoon, 2 men showed up at my front gate. Both mid-40s, bulky, clean-shaven, dressed in matching black tactical polos with a faux badge embroidered over the left chest pocket. HOA Enforcement Unit. They didn't knock. They just stood there staring at the house like they were waiting for something to happen. I stepped outside with my phone already recording. "Can I help you?" I asked, keeping my tone flat. "Good morning, sir," said the taller one. "We're conducting a routine inspection in coordination with the HOA's Public Safety Initiative. We need to verify compliance regarding external lighting and potential gas hazards." "Funny," I said. "There's no mention of any initiative in the HOA charter, and I don't recall the board voting on this. We've been authorized by the president to perform on-site evaluations." "Authorization doesn't equal legality," I replied. "You're not licensed inspectors. You're not city code enforcement. You're not even registered private security." They paused. That hesitation told me everything. I pointed to the small "No Trespassing" sign near my mailbox. "You step onto my property, I'll consider it trespassing. HOA rules don't override state law. You got paperwork? Let's see it." One of them pulled out a folder and handed me a single laminated page that looked like it had been cooked up on Microsoft Word the night before. It had a stamp. Just a circular logo of the HOA with the words Enforcement Division underneath it. Not a seal, not a court order, just a glorified flyer with clip art and bad kerning. "Have a nice day, gentlemen," I said, and closed the gate in their faces. That evening, Nick rewired our motion sensor lights to include a recording trigger. Every time someone came within 20 feet of the front steps, the camera would log footage to a local drive and the cloud. He also installed 2 floodlights in the backyard and 1 by the side entrance, bright enough to fry a mosquito in flight. If they came back, they'd be lit up like actors in a police procedural. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about the way those men didn't flinch, didn't laugh, didn't wink. They believed in whatever this was. Either Karen had found true believers, or she was paying people who couldn't spell due process to play pretend cop on her behalf. I wasn't sure which option disturbed me more. The following day, I got a call from my neighbor, Layla Rivera. She's a sharp attorney in her 40s, moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago. She'd gone toe-to-toe with the HOA before over a garden shed of all things, and she had the scars to prove it. "Dan," she said without preamble, "you've been targeted." "Yeah, I figured that part out. They've formed a shadow committee inside the HOA board. It's not public, not voted on. Karen's calling it the Internal Integrity Wing, which sounds like something out of a dystopian novel. They're trying to enforce HOA policies with a private enforcement arm. Is that even legal? It's a gray area until someone sues. They're pretending to be security, but there's no registration, no state licensing. They're not listed in the Nevada DPS registry. That makes their operation illegal, and no one's stopping them. Most people are too scared or too apathetic. You'd be surprised how fast folks will trade freedom for peace and quiet when someone knocks on their door in a uniform. She offered to help if things escalated, court filings, protective injunctions, whatever it came to. I thanked her, told her I'd hold off. I still hoped this was Karen overplaying her hand, that she'd step back once she realized we weren't going to be steamrolled. But later that night, I found something in the hedges by the side gate. Half buried in the gravel was a tiny black device, a wireless earpiece. Someone had dropped it or left it behind. I brought it inside, put it in a plastic bag, and added it to the small folder Nick had labeled Evidence. HOA Stupidity. We weren't playing house anymore. This was something else. Organized, systematic, and escalating. I looked out the window, past the motion lights, into the dark street beyond. I didn't see the SUV, but I felt it. Watching, waiting. It happened at 5:07 in the morning. I remember the time exactly because the sound that ripped through my front hallway jolted me awake like a firecracker under the bed. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in suburbia. A deep, crunching boom followed by the splintering of wood and the sharp squeal of metal giving way. For half a second I thought we were being robbed. Then I heard the boots. Heavy footsteps. 4 sets. Charging in fast. Before I could reach the hallway, I was blinded by flashlights. Bright white beams slicing through the dim interior like searchlights in a prison yard. Voices barked orders with mechanical urgency. "Basement access. Gas alert. We need immediate entry." They weren't police. That much I knew by the uniforms, black tactical gear without badges, just Velcro patches that read HOA Enforcement Division in all caps. One of them had a plastic clipboard. Another held what looked like a cheap breathalyzer. The guy in front, stocky with a buzz cut, shoved a piece of laminated paper into my face. "Suspected gas leak reported," he barked. "We need access to your basement. Now." "You just broke into my house," I shouted, still in my damn bathrobe, heart pounding. "Where's your warrant? Who the hell do you think you are?" He ignored me and pushed past, heading toward the back hall. Another grabbed my arm, tight grip, too tight for inspection. I yanked back, stumbled, nearly fell into the entry table. That's when Nick's door flew open. He came out fast and barefoot, wearing nothing but gym shorts, still half asleep, hair a mess, but his posture said one thing: "You picked the wrong house." The closest intruder turned, clearly underestimating what he was about to get hit with. Nick didn't even speak. He just moved. A front kick, lightning fast, caught the guy square in the gut. The man went flying backward into the coat rack, which snapped in half on impact. The next one stepped forward, raising his hands like he was trained, but Nick slipped around his flank and hit him with a clean elbow to the jaw. Down he went, crumpling like wet laundry. The third guy tried to grab Nick in a tackle. Mistake. Nick spun, locked his arm under the man's shoulder, twisted, and brought him to the floor in a controlled throw that ended with a loud pop from the man's shoulder. The fourth one hesitated. "Don't," Nick said, breath steady. "Don't even think about it." That guy took 2 steps back and raised his hands. He wasn't stupid. He just hadn't realized until now that they weren't the wolves in this house. They were the meat. I had already dialed 911. My voice was shaky when I gave them the address, but I made damn sure to emphasize the words home invasion, unauthorized entry, and armed personnel impersonating law enforcement. The dispatcher asked if we were safe. I looked over. Nick was standing over the 3 bodies, chest rising and falling, fists loose at his sides. One guy was groaning on the floor, clutching his shoulder. Another had blood on his mouth. The last was trying not to breathe too hard. "I think we're good," I said. "For now." It took the sheriff's deputies 8 minutes to arrive, longest 8 minutes of my life. While we waited, I sat on the living room chair, still in my robe, trying not to pass out from the adrenaline dump. Nick disappeared for a moment and came back with a hoodie and pants. Calm as hell. He pulled on socks like he was getting ready for a jog, not cleaning up a live-action home invasion. "Think they'll send more?" he asked. I looked at the busted front door, hanging half off the frame, and the gouges in the wood floor where boots had scraped through. If they do, we're charging admission next time. When the cops finally showed up, things got complicated fast. The 4 intruders were on the floor, one of them clearly needing medical attention. They had tactical gear, official-looking documents, and a story that sounded like a parody of due process. They claimed they were acting under emergency protocol based on a neighborhood gas leak report. One of them even said, "We were protecting community safety." Nick just raised an eyebrow. "By kicking in our door at 5 in the morning?" The lead deputy looked at me. "You mind if we check your security footage?" "Be my guest," I said, gesturing to the kitchen where the monitor was. "It's all there. Audio and everything." He nodded and stepped inside, carefully, as if the house itself might lash out at him. By the time the ambulance pulled up for the guy with the dislocated shoulder, I was already printing copies of the footage. Nick stood near the hallway, silent, arms crossed, not gloating, just aware, watching. He hadn't asked for this, none of us had. But from that moment on, it was war. When the cops showed up, I thought they'd see what we saw. 4 armed lunatics in black polos lying in my foyer like the cleanup phase of a failed militia raid. I thought they'd arrest them on the spot. I thought maybe for once reality would make sense. But when 2 deputies stepped through the ruined doorway, hand on holster, one of them hesitated. The taller one looked down at the broken men sprawled on my hardwood floor, then at Nick, then back to me. His eyes narrowed. "Sir, are you the homeowner?" "I am," I said. "Dan Harding. This is my house." He nodded, slow, cautious. "And what exactly happened here?" I blinked. "They broke in at 5 in the morning. No warrant, no warning. Claimed there was a gas leak. My son defended me." One of the other officers crouched beside the guy with the busted shoulder, who was moaning theatrically now like he was trying to win an Oscar. The deputy looked back at me. "They said they're part of your neighborhood's HOA enforcement." "They're part of something," I said. "But it sure as hell isn't legal." I took a breath and pointed to the corner of the living room where our home security monitor sat on a small desk. Everything's recorded. You can watch it for yourself. Full audio and video. 2 angles. They followed me over. I pulled up the footage. Clean, crisp, time-stamped. The moment the battering ram struck, the men pouring in like they were breaching a hostage situation. One grabbed me. Another barked something about the basement. The full view of Nick coming out of the hallway like a ghost and methodically folding them like chairs at a church social. The deputy let out a low whistle. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "They didn't even knock." "Yeah," I said. "That's kind of the point." We handed them the laminated paper one of the men had flashed at me during the raid. It looked even dumber in the daylight. A piece of clip art garbage with the words Emergency Entry Authorization, HOA Internal Safety Division. It had no signature, no address, just a bold HOA logo and a completely fictitious statute number. The deputy took it and looked at it like it might start smoking in his hands. "We're going to need to make some calls," he said. Nick stood off to the side during most of this, arms crossed, quiet. He looked like a guy who'd just walked out of a ring. Not sweating, but ready if round 2 started without warning. Not long after, a white Lexus SUV pulled up outside, tires crunching the gravel with deliberate authority. And there she was, Karen Douglas. Hair pulled back tight enough to cause migraines, clipboard in hand, lips pursed into a frown like she was sucking lemons through a straw. She strode past the police tape like it was beneath her, marched right up to the porch, and said, "What exactly is the problem here?" The lead officer raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, who are you?" "Karen Douglas, president of the HOA." She said it like she expected trumpets to sound afterward. This was an authorized inspection under the HOA's Emergency Infrastructure Clause. We received reports of a possible gas leak and were exercising our community safety prerogative. The deputy blinked, then turned slowly to me. I nodded slightly, just enough to say, "This is the nutcase in charge." "Do you have any legal documents to support this inspection?" the deputy asked. Karen handed over a packet, more printed nonsense. Several pages of fake policy blurbs, invented authority, and one pseudo-legal chart that looked like it had been downloaded from a conspiracy forum. She talked fast, too fast. Used phrases like emergency compliance ordinance and internal rapid response mandate. The officer wasn't buying it. I stepped in. "These aren't real. The HOA doesn't have authority for forced entry. There's no clause like this in the bylaws." I checked myself, and I've got them printed if you want to compare. The deputy gave Karen one of those long professional stares, the kind where he didn't say anything for a full 3 seconds. That pause said more than any threat ever could. "Ma'am," he finally said, "you and your enforcement personnel are going to need to stay put while we make some calls." Layla showed up not long after, dressed like she'd stepped out of a courtroom, even though it was barely sunrise. She'd been up, probably monitoring the whole neighborhood through some caffeine-fueled sixth sense. "Dan," she said, heard the bang from down the block. She surveyed the wreckage, the dented door, the blood on the floor. Her eyes hardened when she spotted the faux officers on the porch, being treated by EMTs like they were wounded heroes. She wasted no time. "These men are not licensed private security. The HOA is not a registered security authority. They've violated state law on at least 3 counts, and I can list them right now if you'd like." She handed one of the deputies a manila folder full of citations, legal codes, precedent cases. I love prepared people. She was practically frothing legal ammunition. The cops didn't cuff anyone that morning, but they separated everyone and started asking the right questions. One deputy got on the phone with the state licensing board. Another called his captain. The guy with the dislocated shoulder was hauled into an ambulance, complaining the whole time about being attacked while serving his duty. Nick didn't say a word through most of it. He just stood near the broken door frame, arms folded, watching, observing. When the sun finally broke over the rooftops, I realized we were still standing in what used to be my peaceful little living room. And now it looked like the opening scene of a lawsuit. The first sign that things were about to get worse came just after lunch when I got a call from a restricted number. The voice on the other end didn't identify himself. Didn't need to. "This is a courtesy warning," the man said flatly. "You've assaulted legally appointed HOA safety personnel. There will be consequences." Then he hung up. I stared at the phone for a long second, then set it down and went outside. Nick was already fixing the front door, half a drill in one hand, sweat on his brow. He looked at me like he already knew. Something happen? They're doubling down, I said. And they think we're going to fold, he grunted. Then they don't know us very well. By late afternoon, things started moving fast. The sheriff's office called. An investigator had been assigned to review the footage and documentation from our security system. Layla helped me file a formal complaint for unlawful entry, impersonation of law enforcement, and destruction of property. She added a request for a restraining order against the HOA's so-called enforcement division. At the same time, Karen went into PR overdrive. An emergency bulletin was distributed across the neighborhood, complete with dramatic wording about suspicious behavior at my address, alleged obstruction of safety operations, and even a warning to neighbors to avoid contact with potentially volatile individuals. It had my address printed in bold. No name, just address. I stood in my kitchen holding that paper, reading it twice. My fists clenched. "She's trying to make us the threat," I said aloud. Nick looked over. "That's what cowards do when they get caught. Lie louder." Layla came by that evening with more than just legal advice. She had documents, real ones, showing that the HOA Enforcement Division wasn't registered with the state, wasn't certified as a private security firm, and wasn't listed on any municipal coordination rosters. The uniforms, purchased from a website specializing in tactical cosplay. The SUV, registered under a shell company that led back to a P.O. box, leased under the name Douglas Residential Services, LLC. It gets better. One of the men Nick had taken down, our friend with the busted shoulder, had a LinkedIn profile listing his current employment as personal logistics coordinator for a company in Reno that, as of this week, no longer existed. A few reverse searches and some digital sleuthing from my IT background, and I found more. His address was fake. The references on his page were fake. Even the business license for the so-called firm they worked under expired 2 years ago. Karen wasn't just building a private army. She was building it on a foundation of fiction. I forwarded everything to the investigator with a neat little note. "Please find attached the resumes of your would-be suburban Gestapo." The next day, the sheriff's office began pulling threads. One deputy came by for a formal interview. I handed him printed security footage, phone logs, the forged authorization letter, and a signed affidavit Layla had drawn up. He took it all without comment, but I saw the look in his eyes, someone realizing he was sitting on the edge of a scandal. Then came the big one. We found the money. Layla called me that night with a voice like someone who'd just found a body in the woods. "She's been laundering HOA funds," she said. "I've got bank trails." Karen had been moving quarterly maintenance fees, dues paid by every homeowner in the neighborhood, into an operational emergency fund that didn't exist before she was elected. From there, the money vanished into accounts tied to her brother's so-called private security company and 2 other businesses in her name. We tallied the numbers. Over $120,000 across 2 quarters. Unaccounted for. Mislabeled. Hidden in line items like community preparedness training and equipment depreciation. "She created a paramilitary group using HOA funds," I said. That's a RICO case waiting to happen." Nick looked up from his laptop. "So, what do we do?" "We build a bomb," I said. "Not the kind with wires, the kind with affidavits, bank statements, and legal precedent. And when it drops, Karen's empire goes with it." Layla filed a motion for discovery the next morning. The sheriff's office launched a parallel investigation, and we were granted temporary protection from HOA entry, fines, and contact. But then Karen retaliated. A new envelope showed up in my mailbox. Certified, fancy paper, HOA letterhead. It was a lawsuit, filed in small claims court. The charge: assault on designated neighborhood officers during performance of duty, seeking $15,000 in damages and a restraining order against Nick. She was suing us. Nick read it once, then folded it in half and set it on the table like it was junk mail. "You want to laugh or scream?" I asked him. "Neither," he said. "Let's bury her with evidence." We walked into the courthouse that Monday with nothing but evidence and anger. Nick wore a suit. It didn't fit him quite right. His shoulders strained the fabric, and the tie looked like it had been tied by someone who'd watched a YouTube tutorial on mute. But he walked with the kind of calm that unsettles people. I carried the folder, thick, overstuffed, organized like a damn prosecutor's briefcase. Small claims court. That's where Karen wanted her battle. A tidy little venue, low-stakes optics, easy to manipulate. She probably thought we'd come in fuming, look unstable, and give her the optics she needed to paint us as dangerous, litigious aggressors. What she didn't expect was precision. Her lawyer was a weasel in a blue blazer with a neck like a vulture and a voice like a man who bills by the comma. He stood up, referred to Nick as a trained combatant, described the HOA's mission as neighborhood integrity through safety infrastructure, and used the word duty more times than a war movie. "Your Honor," he said, "these individuals attacked my client's personnel while they were performing an emergency inspection. My client regrets the damage done to Mr. Harding's door, but the concern for community safety outweighed procedural constraints." I could practically see the judge's eyebrows lifting into orbit. We took our turn. Layla was with us, not officially representing, just assisting with documentation. Nick remained silent the entire time, arms crossed. I presented the footage. 2 angles. Entry, impact, voices shouting, no visible warrant. Then Nick, methodical, controlled, neutralizing the threat like a well-trained pressure valve. I presented the forged documents, the made-up policy numbers, the non-existent statutes. The licensing report from the state showing 0 authorization for any HOA enforcement division. Then came the bank statements. Layla stood and delivered those herself. She handed copies to the judge, pointed out the missing funds, the shell accounts, and the direct transfers to companies tied to Karen and her brother. She didn't shout. She didn't embellish. She just read numbers. Cold, factual, lethal. Karen was in the room, front row. Red blouse, arms crossed, expression frozen somewhere between rage and indigestion. Her lawyer tried to object, said it was outside the scope of the case. The judge let him finish, then leaned forward, removed his glasses, and said, "Son, if this woman's organization broke into a man's house at 5 in the morning, filed a retaliatory lawsuit using falsified credentials, and diverted community funds to do it, you're going to need to sit down and listen real carefully." The court dismissed the HOA's claim on the spot, with prejudice, which meant they couldn't file again, and the judge recommended that the district attorney review the case for potential criminal investigation. But it didn't stop there. That night, I received an email from someone I didn't know. A neighbor from 3 streets over, then another, then 5 more, all describing similar encounters. Sudden inspections, strange men in uniform knocking on doors at odd hours, warning letters, citations for things like unsanctioned porch decor or excessive wind chimes. One guy had been fined for unauthorized festive illumination. It took me a second to realize he meant Christmas lights. Karen had been testing the water across the whole neighborhood. Our case just happened to be the one where she slipped and fell, face first, into the legal equivalent of a wood chipper. Layla helped me compile the complaints. We set up a private meeting at my house with a half-dozen neighbors. They came in quietly, some nervous, some angry, all exhausted. It was the first time most of them realized they weren't alone. We laid out the paperwork, the video evidence, the money trail. By the end of the evening, we had a full coalition. The next morning, the sheriff's department served a search warrant on the HOA's offices. Nick and I watched from the end of the block as uniformed deputies hauled out file boxes, hard drives, and laptops. Karen stood nearby, arms folded, lips tight, muttering under her breath to a man I assumed was her brother. One of the officers from the morning of the raid, now without his badge, sat on the curb with his head in his hands. I took a photo, just one, for the record. That evening, I made myself a whiskey, sat on the repaired porch, and watched as neighborhood kids rode bikes past the now empty black SUV parked down the street. Its decals had been peeled off, its authority stripped. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt earned. I didn't expect to get a call from the district attorney himself. He introduced himself in that formal but friendly tone you only hear from men used to hearing lies for a living. "Mr. Harding, I've reviewed the footage and your documentation. We're initiating a formal inquiry into HOA leadership and the misuse of funds under Ms. Karen Douglas. I'd appreciate your cooperation as a primary witness." Primary witness. Never thought I'd hear those words aimed at me. Not in a case like this. We scheduled the meeting for the following week. In the meantime, things in the neighborhood went from tense to volatile. The HOA office stayed shuttered after the raid. Its windows were papered over, mailbox locked. No new memos came, no patrols, no more men in fake uniforms parked down the street. And yet, the damage lingered. A few board members began resigning, quietly, without explanation. Karen's inner circle was crumbling. Rumors swirled that one of them had flipped, agreed to cooperate in exchange for immunity. Another neighbor said she saw Karen screaming at a man in her driveway one night, waving a stack of shredded papers in one hand and a cell phone in the other. Nick joked she was probably trying to eat the evidence. Then came the subpoenas. Residents started receiving formal notices to appear before a state oversight board for HOA conduct. Some were being investigated for complicity. Others, like me, were being asked to provide testimony. Layla was in the thick of it, coordinating statements, helping homeowners prepare their evidence, compiling a timeline that made Watergate look like a bookkeeping error. One evening, we hosted a neighborhood meeting in my backyard. It wasn't fancy, just a circle of folding chairs and a folding table covered in lemonade, cookies, and a massive stack of files. 20 people showed up. That was 20 more than ever attended the official HOA meetings. Layla stood in front and laid it out plainly. There was no vote authorizing the formation of any enforcement body. The use of HOA funds to finance private security without board oversight is illegal under Nevada law. Karen forged meeting minutes, falsified approvals, and rerouted payments into shell entities controlled by her brother and herself. That's felony-level fraud. The air was heavy. Some residents looked stunned. Others just nodded slowly, as if they had suspected but never dared to believe it. One man stood up. Mr. Porter, retired school principal, quiet, polite, never so much as raised his voice in the years I'd lived here. I paid a fine last month for not trimming my hedge. $200. The letter said if I didn't pay within 10 days, my house could be liened. He held up the receipt. I want that money back. I want all of it back. That lit the fuse. Others joined in. Fines for flower bed violations, noise citations for barking dogs, alleged violations of invisible property line markers. It was like the dam broke and all the grievances flooded out at once. Nick stood off to the side through all of it. He didn't speak much, just watched, guarding, listening. Every now and then he'd nod when someone made a particularly sharp point. I think it helped people feel safe, knowing he was there. Then came the day of Karen's arrest. No warning, no spectacle, just a county vehicle pulling up to her house one gray morning. 2 plainclothes officers. They walked her out in handcuffs. Not a word. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She just walked stiff and pale like the weight of it all had finally snapped her upright. They hit her with everything. Fraudulent use of HOA funds, impersonation of law enforcement authority, conspiracy to commit unlawful entry, forgery of legal documents, operating an unlicensed security entity, attempted intimidation of witnesses. Layla called me as soon as the booking report went public. 18 charges total, she said, her voice bright. It's going to trial. The fallout was immediate. The HOA was declared non-functional by a municipal audit. A court-appointed trustee was sent in to oversee operations pending dissolution. A full forensic accounting team was assigned to examine the last 3 years of financials. Early numbers estimated over $150,000 unaccounted for. I sat with Nick on the porch that evening, sipping iced tea, looking out over a now quiet street. She thought she could build her own little empire, I said, turn a neighborhood into a dictatorship. Nick shrugged. That's the thing about power. People like her never check the wiring before they flip the switch. We sat in silence a while. A cool breeze moved across the street. For the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like someone was watching. Then Nick stood, stretched his arms, and grinned. You think the court would let me keep one of those fake badges as a trophy? Exactly 32 days after they kicked in my front door, I installed a brand new one. Reinforced frame, smart lock, the kind you can't open with a boot, and a fake badge. The porch had been rebuilt, too. New steps, fresh railing, even a coat of walnut stain. Funny how a place can look brand new once you purge the rot from beneath it. It wasn't just my house that changed. The whole neighborhood felt different now. Less afraid, more present. I saw people walking their dogs with their shoulders relaxed. Folks waved again. One man I'd never even spoken to before handed me a 6-pack of beer and said, "Thanks for taking the hit for the rest of us." I didn't correct him. I just accepted it. Karen Douglas was behind bars, sentenced to 18 years without parole. The court didn't hold back. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge called her operation a neighborhood-level abuse of power with criminal intent. Her brother caught 5 years for conspiracy and wire fraud. 2 other board members took plea deals, testified against her in exchange for leniency. The so-called HOA Enforcement Division was exposed for what it was, an illegal, unlicensed crew of glorified thugs. Most of them walked away with fines and probation except one, the same jackass who tried to twist my arm that morning. He got 5 years for felony assault and impersonating an officer. Nick had testified against him, didn't gloat, just laid out the facts like a man who didn't need to throw a punch to make it count. The HOA, dead. The city officially dissolved it after a hearing that was so short it could have been mistaken for a coffee break. In its place, the county assigned a temporary property management group, neutral, administrative, boring as oatmeal, which is exactly what a neighborhood governing body should be. No more uniforms, no more inspections, no more lunatic presidents trying to build empires in cul-de-sacs. The day after the dissolution, I put up a new sign above my mailbox. Clean white background, black letters. It read, "This home is private property, not governed by HOA jurisdiction." Layla laughed when she saw it. A little on the nose, don't you think? I shrugged. If they ever come back, I want the message to be visible from orbit. Nick was finally cleared to resume training. His doctor gave him the green light, and he practically sprinted to the gym. The kid needed it. Fighting is in his bones. But before he left, he helped organize a backyard BBQ. Said we needed to do something normal for once. It turned into a neighborhood gathering. Tables, chairs, burgers, kids running around with sidewalk chalk. You could smell cedar smoke and hear laughter again. People toasted each other, swapped stories, laughed about wind chime fines and fake badges. They laughed because the danger was gone, and because it was the kind of laugh that only comes when justice actually shows up. One man from city council dropped by. Young guy, rolled up sleeves, campaign-style charisma, but surprisingly grounded. He walked over to me, held out his hand and said, "Mr. Harding, I just want to say, you did this neighborhood a favor. You didn't back down. That matters." I didn't have anything poetic to say back, just shook his hand and nodded. As the sun dipped behind the houses, Nick walked over and handed me a beer. Cold, smooth, simple. He looked at the porch, then the yard, then at me. "You ever think about moving after all that?" I took a sip, thought about it. But this place, this is home. And besides, the idiots already blew their chance. Try again, and they'll wish we only had one fighter in this house. We clinked bottles. And in that moment, under the strings of cheap patio lights and the fading echo of laughter, I knew one thing for sure. They'd kicked in the wrong damn door.